Number 1. Kobe Bryant. Some mornings begin with a quiet so absolute, it feels almost like a warning. January 26, 2020, in Southern California, was one of those mornings. The sky was swallowed by a thick, suffocating marine layer, a dense fog that clung to the hills of Calabasas like a shroud. Below that gray canopy, the world was waking up, unaware that in just a few short hours, a tragedy would strike that would shatter the illusion that unfathomable wealth offers any protection from fate. If you are captivated by the fragile line between immense power and sudden tragedy, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an investigation. And stay with us through this entire journey, because I promise you, the final case in this series involves a mystery so dark and undeniably brutal, it will leave you completely speechless. For now, our focus is on a man who needed no introduction. Kobe Bryant was a titan, a modern-day gladiator who amassed a fortune of nearly $600 million through sheer, unrelenting willpower. That morning, he was just a father taking his 13-year-old daughter, Gianna, and their friends to a youth basketball tournament. For a man of his means, traffic was an obstacle easily bypassed. His chariot was a state-of-the-art Sikorsky S-76 helicopter, a marvel of engineering described as a flying limousine, renowned for its unparalleled safety record. It was supposed to be a simple 30-minute flight, but as the aircraft lifted into the blinding mist, a critical chain of events was already in motion. Do you think high-profile individuals place too much trust in private aviation over standard safety protocols when weather conditions are marginal? Let me know your thoughts down below. The pilot, highly experienced and deeply trusted, requested special clearance to navigate the worsening conditions. Air traffic control granted it, but the fog was thickening rapidly, swallowing the horizon. As the aircraft pushed further into the white nothingness, communication grew incredibly tense, and the ground below began to vanish entirely, setting the stage for a desperate fight for survival. Up in the sky, inside the luxurious cabin, the mood was likely calm. The passengers, surrounded by leather and soundproofing, trusted the machine and the man flying it. But outside the glass, a nightmare was unfolding. The pilot, Ara Zobayan, was flying under visual flight rules, meaning he needed to be able to see the ground to navigate. Yet the fog over the Santa Monica Mountains was so dense it was like flying into a wall of milk. To avoid the rising terrain, he began a rapid climb, pushing the heavy helicopter up toward the clearer air above the clouds. But in aviation, when a pilot loses visual reference to the Earth, the human brain begins to play terrifying, fatal tricks. It is a phenomenon known as spatial disorientation. The inner ear, the body's natural balance center, becomes violently confused by the movement of the aircraft without the horizon to anchor it. Have you ever experienced a moment of complete disorientation where your senses lied to you? And how do you think a pilot can fight back against their own biology in those crucial seconds? Share your perspective in the comments. In those agonizing moments, the pilot believed he was still climbing, ascending to safety above the oppressive gray blanket. In reality, the helicopter had banked sharply to the left and was entering a catastrophic, accelerating dive. The aircraft was dropping at an astonishing rate of over 4,000 feet per minute, hurtling toward the jagged hillsides of Calabasas. Inside the cabin, gravity would have suddenly felt incredibly heavy, a terrifying shift from smooth flight to a sickening plunge. They had millions of dollars in the bank, global adoration, and access to the best technology money could buy, but none of it mattered in the face of blinding weather and human error. As the fog rushed past the windshield, the radar showed the helicopter plummeting, the numbers dropping relentlessly until they simply stopped, leaving air traffic controllers staring at an empty screen, waiting for a voice that would never answer. The impact was devastating and absolute. At 9:45 in the morning, the Sikorsky S-76 smashed into the steep, rugged terrain of Calabasas at nearly 160 miles per hour. The sheer kinetic force of the crash instantly shattered the aircraft, sparking a brush fire that burned through the damp morning mist. There was no time for rescue, no miraculous survival. All 9 souls on board, including Kobe and the vibrant, talented Gianna, perished instantly. When the news broke, it stopped the world on its axis. How could a man so invincible, a figure carved from pure determination and wealth, be taken so violently, so randomly? The investigation that followed would point to that deadly spatial disorientation, a tragic reminder that the sky does not care about your net worth, your fame, or your legacy. It is an unforgiving frontier that demands absolute respect. Looking back at the findings, do you believe the aviation industry needs stricter regulations for flying in poor visibility? Or was this simply an unavoidable tragedy of human error? We want to read your theories below. The Bryant family was left with an unfillable void, and the public was forced to grapple with the terrifying reality that money cannot buy a safe landing. The legacy of Kobe Bryant remains untouched, his brilliance on the court forever immortalized. But the wreckage on that foggy hillside serves as a haunting monument to our shared, inescapable mortality. It was a day that proved even the brightest stars can be abruptly extinguished by the darkest clouds. But this is only the beginning of our journey into the fatal intersection of immense wealth and private aviation. As we leave the misty hills of California, we must turn our attention eastward, toward the sun-drenched tropical paradise of the Bahamas. The waters there are famously crystal clear and inviting, but on a warm summer evening, they became a watery grave for a fiercely private billionaire and his family, a man who built an empire from the dark depths of the earth, only to meet his end falling abruptly from the sky.
Number 2. Cline. The crystal-clear waters of the Bahamas are supposed to be a sanctuary for the world's elite, a stark contrast to the dark, subterranean coal mines of West Virginia, where our next titan forged his massive fortune. Cline was a man who understood the Earth's deepest pressures, building a staggering net worth of $1.8 billion and earning the title, the King of Coal. But on the night of July 4, 2019, while millions across America celebrated Independence Day with fireworks lighting up the summer sky, a very different kind of drama was unfolding on Cline's private, exclusive island of Grand Cay. The warm Caribbean breeze was thick with an unexpected tension. What was meant to be a joyous holiday weekend with his beloved daughter, Cameron, and her closest friends, had suddenly turned into a frantic race against time. A medical emergency had struck someone in their party, demanding immediate high-level attention that the isolated island simply could not provide. For a billionaire, logistical nightmares are just problems waiting for a check to be written. Within moments, his private, state-of-the-art helicopter was summoned, its rotor blades slicing through the humid, pitch-black night air, ready to carry them to a hospital in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. When you possess billions of dollars and can summon a private helicopter on a whim to escape a crisis, do you think it creates a false sense of invincibility against the unpredictable forces of nature? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. The passengers hurried onto the aircraft, leaving the safety of the illuminated helipad behind. As the heavy machine lifted off the ground, ascending into an unusually dark and moonless sky, the ocean below them was a vast, unforgiving void of black ink. They were only a few miles from the coastline, a seemingly routine jump across the water for an experienced flight crew, but within minutes of takeoff, the reassuring thrum of the engine would be swallowed by the deafening silence of a tragedy that no amount of money could prevent, leaving investigators utterly baffled by what happened next.
The flight path from Grand Cay to Florida is a well-traveled corridor for the ultra-rich, but taking off over the open ocean on a moonless night presents a terrifying challenge known to aviators as the black hole effect. Without the distinct glow of city lights or a visible horizon line separating the starry sky from the dark water, the human brain struggles desperately to orient itself. Inside the luxurious cabin, Cline, his daughter, and their 5 companions were likely bracing themselves for a short, turbulent ride, entirely unaware that their pilots were fighting a sudden, invisible war against their own senses. The helicopter climbed into the oppressive darkness, but almost immediately the flight profile became erratic. Radar data would later reveal a machine moving with bizarre, inexplicable aggression, pitching and banking violently as if wrestling with an unseen demon in the night sky. Do you think the intense pressure of transporting a billionaire during a medical emergency pushes pilots to take risks they would otherwise avoid under standard protocols? Drop your theories in the comments. The altimeter numbers fluctuated wildly, a mechanical heartbeat racing toward failure. Instead of a steady, climbing trajectory toward the Florida coast, the aircraft entered a catastrophic, steepening spiral back toward the very waters they had just escaped. For those left behind on the island, the agonizing wait began. The steady, comforting sound of the helicopter blades faded into the distance, replaced by the rhythmic, haunting sound of the ocean waves crashing against the shore. Minutes stretched into hours. Phone calls went unanswered. The sudden, chilling realization began to creep in that the king of coal, a man who had conquered the treacherous depths of the earth, had vanished without a trace into the shallow, dark waters of his own paradise. Rescue crews scrambled, their searchlights cutting through the gloom, scanning the surface for any sign of the missing billionaire, completely unaware of the devastating scene waiting for them just beneath the surface.
As the sun rose over the Bahamas on the morning of July 5th, the brilliant turquoise waters revealed the heartbreaking cost of the night's desperate flight. Just 2 miles from the private shores of Grand Cay, search divers located the submerged wreckage of the once magnificent helicopter. It was resting in merely 16 feet of water, a twisted, silent tomb of metal and shattered glass. The violent impact had instantly claimed the lives of all 7 people on board, extinguishing the bright futures of Cameron and her friends, and ending the reign of one of America's most powerful self-made billionaires. Chris Cline, who had amassed a staggering $1.8 billion fortune by pulling energy from the dark underground, met his end in the dark, suffocating embrace of the ocean. The devastating news sent shockwaves from the tightly knit communities of West Virginia all the way to the upper echelons of global finance. To this day, the exact sequence of mechanical or human failures that caused the brand new helicopter to fall from the sky remains the subject of a complex, ongoing investigation. Investigators have combed over the twisted rotors and salvaged flight data, searching for the singular moment where luxury and tragedy violently collided. Knowing that the investigation is still open, do you suspect a mechanical failure was covered up, or was this purely a tragic miscalculation by the flight crew? Let us know what you think below. The Cline family was left with an empire, but lost its king and a beloved daughter in a single merciless instant, proving once again that the elements bow to no man, regardless of his net worth. Yet the sky holds many more secrets, and our journey into the fatal flights of the ultra-wealthy is far from over. We must now leave the tropical waters of the Caribbean and cross the Atlantic to the historic, bustling streets of Europe. In our next case, we will explore the terrifying final moments of a fiercely private construction mogul whose single-engine aircraft turned a quiet Sunday afternoon in a major Italian city into an apocalyptic nightmare of fire and collapsing concrete.
Number 3. Dan Petrescu. We have crossed the Atlantic to the sprawling, historic streets of Milan, Italy, where the quiet of a Sunday afternoon was violently shattered by the terrifying descent of a fiercely private construction mogul. Dan Petrescu was a phantom billionaire, a man who amassed one of the largest fortunes in Romania through a vast empire of construction companies and hypermarket chains, yet walked the streets completely unrecognized by the public. He controlled billions, but on October 3, 2021, all of his wealth could not buy him a single second of mercy from the sky. As we delve into the devastating final moments of his life, I must remind you that you will want to stay with us until the very end, because the final part of this series is a deeply investigating, brutal mystery that will leave you questioning everything you know about aviation. On that fateful autumn day, Petrescu was behind the controls of his own Pilatus PC-12, a sleek, single-engine aircraft revered for its reliability and luxury. He was joined by his wife, Veronica, his 30-year-old son, Dan Stefano, and 5 close friends, all looking forward to a short, scenic flight to their sprawling family villa on the island of Sardinia. The mood inside the cabin was undoubtedly joyful, filled with the warmth of a family vacation. When billionaires choose to fly their entire family in a single-engine aircraft, do you think they are displaying absolute confidence in their skills or a dangerous blind spot to the risks of a single point of failure? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. They taxied down the runway at Linate Airport, the engine roaring with immense power. Air traffic control gave the clearance, and the silver plane lifted gracefully into the overcast Italian sky. But mere minutes after leaving the safety of the tarmac, something inside the cockpit went horribly wrong, and the routine flight path suddenly transformed into a desperate, plunging trajectory toward a heavily populated urban center. The Pilatus PC-12 had barely reached an altitude of 5,000 feet when the flight radar registered a chilling anomaly. Instead of continuing its steady climb southward toward the Mediterranean Sea, the aircraft suddenly veered off course, carving a sharp, agonizing arc over the dense metropolitan sprawl of Milan. Inside the cockpit, the 68-year-old billionaire was locked in a sudden, catastrophic struggle. Air traffic controllers, monitoring the glowing blip on their screens, noticed the terrifying deviation and immediately radioed the pilot, asking if he was experiencing an emergency. The response was a heavy, suffocating silence. Not a single distress call was made. No frantic plea for help broke through the static. There was only the dreadful, accelerating descent of a machine carrying 8 innocent souls falling out of the sky. Why do you think an experienced pilot facing a catastrophic emergency would stay completely silent on the radio instead of calling for help? And what do you think was happening inside that cockpit? Share your theories in the comments below. The silence suggests a sudden, overwhelming crisis. Perhaps it was a massive medical emergency that incapacitated Petrescu instantly, leaving the aircraft without a conscious pilot. Or perhaps it was a catastrophic mechanical failure so severe and sudden that every ounce of his attention was consumed by a futile battle to regain control of the plummeting plane. Whatever the cause, the people on the ground below were completely unaware that a multi-million-dollar missile was hurtling toward them at an unthinkable speed. Witnesses looking up from the suburban streets described a terrifying sight: a sleek aircraft dropping from the clouds, its engines screaming in a high-pitched, unnatural wail that echoed off the concrete buildings. The aircraft was dropping like a stone, passing the point of no return and aiming directly for a massive structure right in the heart of the city, leaving onlookers paralyzed by the horrifying realization of what was about to happen. At exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the Pilatus PC-12 slammed violently into the roof of an empty 2-story office building undergoing renovations in the San Donato Milanese neighborhood. The impact was absolutely deafening, an apocalyptic explosion that instantly vaporized the aircraft and sent a towering plume of thick black smoke billowing into the sky above Milan. The intense fireball engulfed the structure, setting nearby parked cars ablaze and raining flaming debris onto the surrounding streets. It was an absolute miracle that the building was empty on that Sunday, sparing the lives of countless workers on the ground. Tragically, there was no such miracle for the 8 souls aboard the plane. Dan Petrescu, his beloved wife Veronica, his son Dan Stefano, and their 5 friends were all killed instantly in the catastrophic inferno. The Romanian billionaire, who had spent his life building massive concrete structures, met his end crashing into one. When an entire family line is wiped out in a single devastating aviation accident, do you believe there should be strict rules against ultra-wealthy families flying together on the same private aircraft? Let us know your perspective in the comments. The aftermath left investigators sifting through the charred, twisted wreckage, desperately trying to determine if the crash was born from a mechanical flaw in the prized aircraft or a sudden, fatal flaw in the human heart of the man flying it. The tragic loss of the Petrescu family erased a colossal financial dynasty in the blink of an eye, leaving behind a haunting void in the European business world. But our exploration of immense wealth falling from the sky does not end to the ashes of Italy. We must now travel to the damp, unpredictable skies of England, where a beloved billionaire sports owner stepped into his luxury helicopter right on the manicured grass of his own stadium, completely unaware that a microscopic mechanical failure was about to tear his world apart.
Number 4. Vichai Srivaddhanaprabha. The damp, unpredictable skies of England were a backdrop for triumph at the King Power Stadium, where a beloved billionaire sports owner stepped into his luxury helicopter right on the manicured grass, completely unaware that a microscopic mechanical failure was about to tear his world apart. Vichai Srivaddhanaprabha was not just a businessman, he was a miracle worker to the people of Leicester. As a Thai billionaire who built a staggering $5.1 billion empire, he purchased Leicester City Football Club and orchestrated one of the greatest underdog victories in sports history. The city absolutely adored him, viewing him not merely as a corporate titan, but as a deeply generous patriarch. Before we delve into the chilling details of that fateful October night, I must remind you to stay with us, because our final case involves a mystery so undeniably brutal and investigating, it will leave you breathless and searching for answers. On the evening of October 27, 2018, the atmosphere was buzzing with the lingering adrenaline of a hard-fought match.
For Vichai, taking his Leonardo AW-169 helicopter directly from the center circle of the pitch was a thrilling post-match ritual. It was a glittering symbol of immense success, bypassing the snarling post-game traffic. He boarded the sleek aircraft alongside 2 dedicated staff members and 2 highly experienced pilots. When billionaires use powerful helicopters essentially as flying cars from crowded arenas, do you think the sheer convenience justifies the terrifying inherent risk to the crowds below? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The bright stadium lights illuminated the spinning rotor blades as the heavy machine gracefully lifted off the damp grass. It climbed steadily into the crisp autumn night, projecting an aura of untouchable wealth. But as the helicopter reached an altitude of 400 feet, the steady thrumming of the engine was violently interrupted by a sharp mechanical snap, instantly transforming the multi-million-dollar aircraft into an uncontrollable spiraling death trap high above the city streets.
Inside the meticulously designed cabin, the sudden, violent loss of aerodynamic control would have been violently disorienting and absolutely terrifying for everyone on board. The Leonardo AW-169 is considered a marvel of modern aviation, equipped with redundant safety systems specifically meant to prevent catastrophic mid-air failures. But helicopters inherently rely on a complex, fragile balance of physics to stay airborne. In a fraction of a second, that delicate balance was completely obliterated. The fatal flaw was not a devastating bird strike or a catastrophic pilot error, but a microscopic disconnection hidden deep within the tail rotor control system. A tiny pin mechanism, unseen and unmonitored by the digital sensors, had silently failed, instantly seizing the tail rotor blades and stripping the pilot of any ability to control the aircraft's yaw. Without the tail rotor pushing back against the immense torque of the main engine, the fuselage of the helicopter immediately began to spin violently in the opposite direction. If a $50 million flying machine can be brought down by the failure of a single tiny mechanical pin, do you feel that modern aviation relies entirely too heavily on vulnerable microscopic components? Drop your theories in the comments. The seasoned pilot, Eric Swaffer, was suddenly wrestling with a heavy, spinning metal box falling from the pitch-black night sky. In the cockpit, warning alarms would have been screaming over the sickening, dizzying rotation of the cabin. He had mere seconds to react, desperately manipulating the manual controls to pull the doomed helicopter away from the crowded stadium and the thousands of vulnerable fans still lingering near the exits. It was an agonizing, heroic display of airmanship under completely impossible conditions. Those standing on the ground watched in sheer horror as the bright navigation lights of the helicopter traced a sickening corkscrew pattern in the dark sky. The deafening sound of the failing rotors echoed off the concrete walls, a mechanical scream signaling absolute doom as the helpless passengers were hurtled toward the cold pavement of a nearby parking lot.
The subsequent impact was a cataclysmic, world-shattering eruption of twisted metal and raging fire. The heavy helicopter plummeted from the autumn sky and slammed mercilessly into a concrete car park just yards away from the very stadium where Vichai had experienced his greatest, most joyous triumphs. Instantly upon impact, the aircraft's pressurized fuel tanks ruptured, igniting a massive, towering inferno that consumed the shattered wreckage in a blinding flash of extreme heat. Desperate first responders rushed toward the blaze, but the sheer intensity of the chemical fire made any rescue attempt absolutely impossible. All 5 souls on board, including the visionary billionaire, his loyal staff members, and the heroic pilots who miraculously managed to steer the falling bomb away from the crowded public, were lost in the devastating crash. The morning sun rose over Leicester to reveal a quiet city drowning in profound grief. Mountains of colorful flowers, team scarves, and weeping fans surrounded the stadium walls, mourning a man whose unimaginable wealth was eclipsed by his warm-hearted generosity. Looking at the heartbreaking aftermath of this tragedy, do you believe the families of victims in private aviation crashes receive adequate justice when the deadly fault lies entirely in the hands of corporate manufacturers? Let us know your perspective below. The agonizing investigation confirmed the terrifying truth. A disconnected pin in the tail rotor control system had initiated the deadly, uncontrollable spin. It was a stark reminder that even the most expensive aircraft
are merely fragile machines, subject to the random cruelty of mechanical failure. Vichai Srivaddhanaprabha had conquered the cutthroat world of international business and English football, only to be completely undone by a mechanism smaller than a coin. His final moments remain a chilling testament to the fragility of human life. Our journey through the fatal skies is far from over. We must now travel to the picturesque hills of Normandy, France, where the heir to a powerful aviation dynasty boarded a helicopter, unaware that his family's legendary mastery of the skies would not save him from a catastrophic, unexplained descent.
Number 5. Olivier Dassault. The picturesque hills of Normandy, France hold centuries of history, but on a crisp Sunday afternoon, they became the final resting place for the heir to one of the most powerful aviation dynasties in the world. Olivier Dassault was a man whose very name was synonymous with conquering the skies. As the scion of the legendary Dassault aviation empire, a company responsible for building some of the most advanced private aircraft on the planet, his bloodline was woven into the fabric of aerospace engineering. His fortune was staggering, estimated at over $6 billion, making him a titan of both industry and politics. Before we uncover the perplexing details of his final flight, I must remind you that the final part of this series is a deeply investigating, brutal mystery that you absolutely need to stick around for. On March 7, 2021, Olivier was concluding a tranquil weekend retreat at his sprawling estate in the glamorous resort town of Deauville. He was a man who understood aircraft better than almost anyone. For his short journey, he stepped into an Aerospatiale AS-350 Écureuil, a highly regarded light helicopter known for its reliability. He was joined only by his pilot, a seasoned professional entrusted with the life of French aerospace royalty. When a billionaire whose family builds the world's safest planes dies in a helicopter crash, do you immediately suspect foul play or a tragic mechanical fluke? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The weather in Normandy was reportedly clear, offering a perfect, unobstructed view of the stunning French coastline. The blades of the Eurocopter began their rhythmic, powerful chopping through the cold coastal air, lifting the two men above the manicured grounds. It was supposed to be a seamless, routine departure for a man who had spent his entire life elevated above the clouds. But as the aircraft ascended into the pale afternoon sky, an unseen, catastrophic sequence of events was already taking hold, preparing to bring a master of aviation violently back down to Earth.
Inside the intimate cabin of the Écureuil, the atmosphere should have been completely relaxed, filled with the routine hum of a perfectly maintained engine. Yet, moments after the skids left the lush grass of the private helipad, the aircraft's graceful ascent violently shattered. The helicopter, rather than climbing steadily towards its cruising altitude, suddenly behaved with terrifying unpredictability. Witnesses on the ground, accustomed to the sight of private aircraft ferrying the ultra-wealthy across the Normandy skies, watched in sheer disbelief as the machine began to struggle against the invisible currents of the air. It did not experience a prolonged, agonizing glide, nor did it send out a frantic, desperate mayday call to air traffic control. Instead, the descent was brutally sudden, a catastrophic loss of aerodynamic stability that stripped the highly trained pilot of any ability to recover. Do you think the pressure of flying aviation royalty causes pilots to make fatal split-second errors during takeoff? Or was this machine doomed before the engine even started? Drop your theories in the comments. For Olivier Dassault, a man who had grown up surrounded by the absolute pinnacle of flight safety technology, the terrifying realization that his own aircraft was betraying him must have been unimaginable. The ground, which should have been falling away beneath them, was now rushing up to meet the windshield at a sickening, inescapable speed. The laws of physics, which his family had spent generations mastering and manipulating for immense profit, were now turned against him in a deadly, uncontrollable plunge. The engine's roar morphed into a frantic mechanical scream as the helicopter plummeted blindly toward the earth. The agonizing seconds stretching between the initial loss of control and the impending devastating impact were filled with a chaotic fight for survival, a desperate wrestling match with a heavy metal machine that had inexplicably become a falling stone. As the tree line rapidly expanded in the cockpit windows, the chilling truth became undeniable. Billions of dollars could not buy them a single second of altitude, leaving them bracing for an absolute catastrophic collision.
The AS-358 Coroil slammed into the rolling landscape of Toux near Deauville with an absolutely devastating force. The violent impact tore the aircraft apart, silencing the engine instantly and leaving a twisted, unrecognizable shell of metal in the serene French countryside. First responders rushed to the horrific scene, hoping against hope for a miracle, but the sheer brutality of the crash had left no room for survival. Both the pilot and the 69-year-old billionaire, Olivier Dassault, were killed on contact. The sudden, violent loss of such a prominent figure sent profound shockwaves through the highest levels of the French government and the global aerospace industry. The President of France publicly mourned the loss of a captain of industry, a man whose life was deeply intertwined with the nation's identity. Yet, the wreckage left behind a chilling, unresolved mystery. Investigators meticulously combed through the shattered components of the helicopter, desperately searching for a mechanical failure or a fatal flaw that could explain why a perfectly good aircraft simply fell from a clear sky. Since the investigation remains open and steeped in mystery, do you believe we will ever learn the absolute truth, or will the secrets be buried to protect the legacy of an aviation dynasty? Share your perspective below. The bitter irony that a member of the Dassault family, pioneers of safe and luxurious flight, met his end in such a tragic aviation disaster is a haunting reminder of our shared vulnerability. It proved that gravity is the ultimate equalizer, indifferent to royal bloodlines and billions in the bank. But our exploration of fatal flights is far from over. We must now leave the quiet hills of France and cross the ocean to the eastern shores of the United States. In our next case, we will delve into a tragedy that shattered the illusion of an American dynasty, where a handsome, beloved prince of a legendary political family flew his single-engine plane into the hazy, darkening skies over the Atlantic, completely unaware that the suffocating night was about to steal his sense of direction and his life.
Number 6. John F. Kennedy Jr. The hazy, darkening skies over the Atlantic Ocean were waiting to claim the handsome, beloved prince of a legendary American dynasty, turning a joyous family weekend into an incomprehensible national tragedy. John F. Kennedy Jr. was the closest thing the United States had to royalty. With a family fortune of roughly $100 million and a legacy that captivated the world from the moment he saluted his father's casket, he lived his entire life under the relentless, unforgiving glare of the public spotlight. He was a brilliant lawyer, a charismatic journalist, and the striking heir to the mythical Camelot. On the stiflingly hot summer evening of July 16, 1999, John arrived at a busy New Jersey airport. He was preparing to pilot his own high-performance Piper Saratoga to the exclusive enclave of Martha's Vineyard. It was supposed to be a magnificent weekend of celebration, attending his cousin's wedding alongside his stunning wife, Carolyn Bessette, and her fiercely intelligent sister, Lauren. But the departure was severely delayed. Agonizing Friday evening traffic held up his passengers, pushing their takeoff dangerously close to the impending sunset. John was still a relatively inexperienced aviator, lacking the advanced instrument rating strictly required to navigate through thick clouds or total darkness safely. Yet the pressure to arrive, the sheer momentum of his incredibly busy life, pushed him to make a fateful, tragic decision. Do you think the immense, unspoken pressure of living up to a legendary family name causes high-profile individuals to ignore their own dangerous limitations and take fatal risks? Share your deepest theories in the comments below. He strapped himself into the pilot's seat, completely underestimating the suffocating, featureless blackness rapidly settling over the coastal waters. As the single-engine plane lifted off the tarmac and banked northeast toward the ocean, the fading twilight was quickly swallowed by a thick, oppressive haze. The reassuring shoreline, usually a comforting visual guide for amateur pilots, began to blur and vanish entirely, setting the chilling stage for a desperate, invisible fight for survival in the vast, empty sky. Inside the cramped, luxurious, leather-lined cabin of the Piper Saratoga, the mood was likely a mixture of exhaustion and quiet anticipation for the festive weekend ahead. Carolyn and Lauren were seated close together behind him, entrusting their lives entirely to the confident man at the controls. But outside the small windshield, an absolute, terrifying void was rapidly forming. As the aircraft left the illuminated glow of the Connecticut coastline and ventured out over the desolate expanse of the Rhode Island Sound, the last remnants of daylight completely evaporated. The oppressive summer haze perfectly blended the pitch-black ocean with the starless night sky, entirely erasing the visual horizon. For a pilot flying strictly under visual flight rules, the horizon is the ultimate, non-negotiable lifeline. Without it, the human brain is easily, lethally deceived by the shifting fluid in the inner ear. It is a terrifying, biological betrayal known to aviators as spatial disorientation. John was flying blindly into a literal black hole, surrounded by an unforgiving sensory vacuum. Have you ever felt completely disoriented in the pitch dark? And how terrifying do you think it is when your own biological senses scream a lie while you operate a flying machine? Tell us your perspective in the comments. He began to struggle quietly, banking the plane slightly to the right, then to the left, his altitude fluctuating wildly as his mind fought a desperate, losing battle against the glowing instruments on the dashboard. He did not trust the artificial horizon staring back at him, relying instead on his dangerously flawed physical sensations. The aircraft entered a treacherous, accelerating rightward turn, completely unbeknownst to the overwhelmed man holding the yoke. It was the devastating beginning of a graveyard spiral, a deadly corkscrew descent that rapidly bleeds altitude. The engine's steady drone pitched into a sickening high-speed whine as immense gravitational forces suddenly pinned the terrified passengers to their seats. In those final agonizing seconds in the absolute dark, the silent confusion in the cockpit morphed into sheer, unalterated terror as the black water rushed up to meet them at a horrifying, inescapable speed.
At roughly 9:40 in the evening, the Piper's Saratoga slammed violently nose down into the unforgiving waters of the Atlantic Ocean at nearly 100 miles per hour. The catastrophic impact shattered the aircraft instantly upon contact, dragging the completely destroyed fuselage directly down to the cold, dark ocean floor. There was absolutely no time to broadcast a distress signal, leaving the world completely oblivious to the monumental tragedy unfolding in the silent night. When the beloved prince failed to arrive at the Martha's Vineyard Airport, a frantic, massive search operation was launched, gripping the entire nation in a state of suspended dread. Days later, Navy divers located the submerged, twisted wreckage resting 116 feet below the surface. John, Carolyn, and Lauren were found still strapped into their seats, their bright futures extinguished in a single, merciless fraction of a second. The devastating loss sent shockwaves across the globe, reigniting whispered conversations about the legendary, inescapable Kennedy curse. Do you believe the so-called family curse is a real, tragic phenomenon? Or is it simply the statistical consequence of a highly ambitious dynasty taking extraordinary, fatal risks? Let us know what you think below. A young man who had access to the absolute best training, unlimited resources, and the world at his fingertips was ultimately undone by a simple, deadly atmospheric illusion. His millions could not buy him a horizon when the sky and the sea became one. The tragic end of John F. Kennedy Jr. remains a profoundly heartbreaking chapter in American history, proving that even the most protected lives are profoundly fragile when confronted by the blind, unfeeling laws of nature. But our chilling journey into the skies of the ultra-rich is far from over. We must now turn our gaze away from the watery depths of the Atlantic and look high above the American heartland, where a famous champion boarded a private jet, unaware that a silent, invisible killer was about to turn his luxurious aircraft into a flying tomb, destined to cruise helplessly across the continent as an unstoppable ghost plane.
Number 7. Payne Stewart. High above the American heartland, a beloved champion boarded a private jet, completely unaware that a silent, invisible killer was about to turn his luxurious aircraft into a flying tomb, destined to cruise helplessly across the continent as an unstoppable ghost plane. Payne Stewart was a legendary figure in professional golf, recognized by his classic, vintage attire and fiercely competitive spirit. Having recently won the prestigious U.S. Open, his career was soaring to unprecedented heights, and his estimated fortune had reached nearly $30 million. Before we delve into the chilling details of his final flight, I must remind you to stay with us until the very end, because our final case is a deeply investigating, brutal mystery
that will leave you absolutely speechless and questioning everything. On the morning of October 25, 1999, Payne arrived at the busy Orlando airport, preparing for a routine flight to Dallas, Texas for a highly anticipated tournament. He boarded his chartered Learjet 35, a high-performance twin-engine aircraft known for its incredible speed and high-altitude capabilities. Joining him were his dedicated agents, a golf architect, and the experienced flight crew, all settling into the leather seats for what was supposed to be a comfortable 3-hour journey. The Learjet taxied down the runway and lifted smoothly into the bright Florida sky, climbing rapidly towards its cruising altitude. Air traffic control monitored their ascent, receiving standard radio acknowledgments from the confident pilots. Everything appeared perfectly normal as the powerful aircraft broke through the morning cloud cover. But deep within the intricate mechanical veins of the pressurization system, a catastrophic, unseen failure had already occurred. As the plane climbed into the thin, freezing upper atmosphere, the breathable air inside the cabin began to seep out into the endless void. The true horror of this flight was not a violent mid-air explosion. It was a creeping, invisible thief, silently stealing the oxygen from their lungs, preparing to execute a slow, chilling tragedy thousands of feet above the unsuspecting world below.
Inside the pressurized cabin, the sudden, silent loss of oxygen would have inevitably triggered high-altitude warning alarms, screaming desperately for the pilots to don their emergency masks and initiate a rapid, life-saving descent. But the truly insidious nature of hypoxia, severe oxygen starvation, is that it does not cause intense pain or immediate panic. Instead, it induces a bizarre, euphoric, and confused state, severely impairing cognitive function and physical coordination in a matter of mere seconds. Before the highly trained flight crew could fully react, process the blaring alarms, and secure their life-saving oxygen supply, their minds were violently betrayed by their own biology. They quietly slipped into a deep, inescapable unconsciousness, leaving the advanced autopilot system entirely in control of the relentlessly climbing aircraft. Down on the ground, frantic air traffic controllers desperately hailed the aircraft, their urgent calls echoing into a heavy, unbroken silence. Realizing a rogue, fully fueled jet was flying unguided across the United States, the military rapidly scrambled F-16 fighter jets to intercept the mysterious ghost plane. When military pilots intercept a completely unresponsive aircraft flying on autopilot over populated cities, do you think the government should make the agonizing decision to shoot it down to prevent a larger catastrophe? Let us know your controversial theories in the comments. The fighter pilots pulled up alongside the Learjet, flying mere feet away at hundreds of miles per hour. Peering closely into the cockpit, they saw absolutely no movement. The windows of the private jet were completely frosted over from the inside, a chilling, undeniable confirmation that the cabin had severely depressurized and the internal temperature had plummeted below freezing. The occupants were already gone, peacefully lost to the thin air, while their multi-million-dollar machine continued its pre-programmed robotic path. For nearly 4 relentless hours, the Learjet cruised silently across the vast American sky, a high-speed flying mausoleum driven blindly by a computer, waiting for the inevitable moment when the fuel tanks would finally run dry. As the ghost plane drifted aimlessly over the rural landscape of the Midwest, the twin engines finally consumed the very last drops of aviation fuel. At exactly 12:13 in the afternoon, the steady, mechanical heartbeat of the Learjet abruptly stopped. The advanced autopilot, desperately trying to maintain the assigned altitude without the necessary forward thrust, pushed the heavy aircraft to its aerodynamic limits until it violently stalled. The lifeless jet aggressively pitched forward, entering a terrifying, uncontrolled corkscrew dive toward the solid Earth. Plummeting at nearly supersonic speeds, the Learjet slammed mercilessly into a marshy, open field near the small town of Mina, South Dakota. The devastating, high-velocity impact instantly obliterated the aircraft, leaving a massive, smoldering crater in the quiet pasture and brutally ending the chilling 4-hour odyssey of Flight N47BA. All 6 souls on board, including the legendary golfer Payne Stewart, were officially declared dead at the scene, though medical examiners confirmed they had likely perished hours earlier in the bright Florida sky. The sheer magnitude of the tragedy sent profound shockwaves through the global sports world and the aviation industry, leading to massive overhauls in safety protocols and high-altitude hypoxia awareness. a man who had conquered the most difficult golf courses in the world, amassing tens of millions of dollars and earning universal adoration, was ultimately defeated by an invisible, silent lack of air. His devastating loss remains one of the most haunting, bizarre, and deeply unsettling aviation mysteries in modern history, serving as a terrifying reminder of how quickly our most advanced technology can become a mechanized tomb. But our journey into the tragic skies of the elite must now cross the ocean once again, transporting us back to the dawn of commercial flight in Czechoslovakia, where a visionary shoe magnate stepped into a small metal plane amidst a violent storm, completely unaware that his towering empire was about to be abruptly crushed by the dark, unforgiving weather.
Number 8. Tomáš Baťa. We have crossed the ocean once again, transporting ourselves back to the dawn of commercial flight in Czechoslovakia, where a visionary shoe magnate stepped into a small metal plane amidst a creeping, blinding fog, completely unaware that his towering empire was about to be abruptly crushed by the dark, unforgiving weather. Tomáš Baťa was a titan of industry before the term even truly existed. Born into a long line of humble cobblers, he revolutionized the manufacturing world, building the Baťa Shoe Company into a colossal, multi-million-dollar global empire. His ambition was limitless, stretching far beyond the borders of his home country. But before we step onto the damp tarmac of 1932, I must remind you to stay with us, because our final case in this series involves a mystery so dark and undeniably brutal, it will leave you completely speechless. On the early morning of July 12, 1932, the sprawling industrial town of Otrakovice was swallowed by an unnaturally thick, heavy fog. The air was thick with moisture, clinging to the massive brick factories that Baťa himself had built. He was scheduled to fly to Switzerland on urgent business, a journey that would oversee the expansion of his ever-growing dominion. For a man whose time was measured in millions, waiting for the weather to clear felt like an unacceptable defeat. His aircraft of choice was the Junkers F-13, a true marvel of early aviation. It was the world's first all-metal transport plane, a rugged, corrugated machine that promised to conquer the skies. But aviation in the early 1930s was an incredibly dangerous frontier. There were no advanced computers, no satellite weather tracking, and no sophisticated autopilot systems to save you when the sky turned against you. Flying relied almost entirely on the raw skill of the pilot and the primitive mechanical instruments on the dashboard. Baťa and his trusted pilot boarded the small, cramped cabin, surrounded by the deafening roar of the engine warming up in the mist. As the Junkers rattled down the primitive runway, the gray wall of fog stood before them like an impenetrable barrier, waiting to test the absolute limits of human ambition against the indifferent power of nature.
Inside the noisy, vibrating cabin of the Junkers F-13, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the luxurious private jets of the modern billionaires we have explored. This was raw, visceral flying. The smell of aviation fuel and hot oil filled the small space as the metal wings desperately bit into the thick, damp air. Almost immediately after lifting off the ground, the aircraft was completely swallowed by the dense, blinding fog that blanketed the Czechoslovakian valley. The pilot, Jindřich Brouček, was highly experienced, but he was instantly stripped of his most vital tool, his vision. The horizon vanished, replaced by a swirling, suffocating gray void that offered absolutely no visual reference to the Earth below. In this terrifying era before modern radar and advanced artificial horizons, a pilot flying into zero visibility was essentially flying blindfolded, relying entirely on a compass and an altimeter that could easily be misinterpreted in the chaos of the moment. When the richest men in the world demand to fly in completely unsafe weather conditions, do you think pilots should be legally protected from being fired if they refuse to take off? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, because this early aviation disaster raises questions we are still fighting over today. The aircraft began to bank dangerously, the pilot's inner ear lying to him about the plane's true position in the sky. The heavy metal machine, burdened by the dense atmospheric pressure,
and a lack of aerodynamic lift, struggled to climb above the deadly weather system. Without the ability to see the sprawling factories and tall smokestacks below them, every single second spent in the fog was a desperate gamble with death. The deafening roar of the single engine echoed eerily through the misty valley, a mechanical cry for help that no one on the ground could answer. The plane was locked in a fatal, invisible spiral, plummeting back toward the very empire Tomáš had built with his bare hands, setting the stage for a heartbreaking collision.
The end came with a sudden, deafening violence that shattered the quiet, foggy morning in Otrokovica. Just minutes after its blind, desperate takeoff, the heavy Junkers F-13 plunged violently from the gray sky, crashing directly into the grounds of the Baťa factory complex itself. The impact was absolutely catastrophic, a brutal collision of corrugated metal and unforgiving earth that completely destroyed the pioneering aircraft. First responders, who were Baťa's own dedicated employees, rushed frantically toward the twisted wreckage hidden in the mist, hoping against hope to save the visionary leader who had given them everything. But the sheer force of the crash left no room for miracles. Both the pilot and the 56-year-old multimillionaire, Tomáš Baťa, were killed instantly amidst the ruins of the aircraft. The man who had revolutionized global industry, putting shoes on the feet of millions across the world, had his life abruptly extinguished on his own property, entirely undone by a simple, deadly layer of fog. The tragic news swept across the globe, a chilling reminder that in the battle between boundless human ambition and the primal forces of nature, nature always possesses the final, decisive move. His colossal fortune, his brilliant mind, and his pioneering spirit were completely powerless against the blinding mist that morning. It remains a haunting chapter in the history of business and aviation, proving that the sky has always demanded the ultimate price from those who dare to challenge it. Yet our descent into the fatal flights of the ultra-wealthy is far from complete. We must now travel from the historic, foggy valleys of Eastern Europe to the sprawling, high-altitude metropolis of Mexico City, where a powerful telecom mogul boarded a modern luxury helicopter, completely unaware that the misty, treacherous ravines surrounding the city were preparing to swallow his family whole. Number 9. Moisés, Saba, Masri. The misty, treacherous ravines surrounding the sprawling, high-altitude metropolis of Mexico City were indeed preparing to swallow a family whole, turning a routine evening commute into an unimaginable, generational nightmare. Moisés Saba Masri was a titan of Mexican industry, a fiercely ambitious businessman who had meticulously built a staggering telecom and real estate empire. He was a man accustomed to viewing the world from the very top, wielding immense power and influence across the nation. Before we explore the agonizing details of this doomed flight, I must remind you that our final case in this series involves a mystery so dark, deeply investigating, and undeniably brutal, it will leave you completely speechless. On the chilly, dark evening of January 10, 2010, Moisés was returning to the city alongside the people he loved most in the world. Joining him were his beloved wife, his adult son, and his daughter-in-law. They were traveling in his private Augusta A109, an Italian-made luxury helicopter renowned for its speed, sleek design, and executive comfort. The Saba family boarded the aircraft after spending the weekend away, expecting a quick, seamless flight over the mountainous terrain and back into the glowing heart of the capital. Do you think the ultra-wealthy often underestimate the sheer danger of flying helicopters at night in mountainous urban areas with unpredictable microclimates? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The helicopter's twin engines roared to life, its powerful rotor blades slicing through the thin, high-altitude air. As the Augusta lifted off and began its journey toward Mexico City, the weather conditions were rapidly deteriorating. A heavy, suffocating blanket of fog was aggressively rolling into the deep ravines and valleys that characterize the Coajimalpa borough. It was a creeping, silent threat that has claimed the lives of countless aviators. For the highly trained pilot, the glittering city lights in the distance offered a false sense of security, masking the deadly, invisible terrain rising up directly in their immediate flight path and setting a terrifying trap in the dark. Inside the plush, soundproofed cabin of the Augusta A109, the Saba family was likely relaxed, insulated from the bitter cold and completely unaware of the deadly meteorological war being waged just outside their windows. As the helicopter entered the airspace over Coajimalpa, the environment shifted violently. The sprawling, neon-lit grid of Mexico City abruptly vanished, completely swallowed by an impenetrable, churning wall of thick gray mist and freezing rain. The pilot, tasked with the immense responsibility of safely delivering a billionaire dynasty, suddenly found himself flying totally blind. Operating a helicopter in dense fog through jagged mountainous ravines is one of the most terrifying, mentally exhausting challenges an aviator can ever face. The margin for error is absolutely zero. If you were a private pilot suddenly engulfed by a blinding wall of fog with your powerful boss's entire family on board, would you risk pushing through to the destination or immediately abort the flight? Drop your theories below. Without visual reference to the horizon or the sharply rising ground below, the pilot was forced to rely entirely on his glowing instrument panel. But in the claustrophobic confines of a deep ravine, radar and altimeters can sometimes offer a delayed, fatal reading. The aircraft was essentially trapped in a rocky, fog-choked canyon, flying at high speed through an invisible maze. The sheer psychological pressure inside the cockpit must have been absolutely suffocating. Every instinct would have been screaming that the ground was too close, but the fog refused to reveal its deadly secrets. The helicopter desperately tried to navigate the treacherous passage, its engines echoing loudly off the unseen rock walls. But the darkness and the mist had completely disoriented the flight crew. They were losing altitude, sinking deeper into the treacherous gorge, entirely unaware that a massive, unyielding wall of earth and stone was rushing up to meet them in the blackness, leaving them with only seconds before the inevitable impact.
The catastrophic end arrived with a deafening, earth-shattering explosion that echoed through the misty valleys of Coajimalpa. The Augusta A109, traveling at a high velocity, violently slammed directly into the side of a deep, heavily wooded ravine. The sheer kinetic force of the impact instantly obliterated the luxury aircraft, tearing the fuselage apart and igniting a massive fireball that briefly illuminated the terrifying fog-choked gorge. Emergency responders, alerted by terrified local residents who heard the apocalyptic crash, faced a grueling, dangerous descent into the steep, fiery ravine. When they finally reached the smoldering, twisted wreckage, the true, heartbreaking scale of the tragedy was revealed. All 6 souls on board had perished instantly. Moisés Saba Masri, his wife, his son, and his daughter-in-law were gone in a single, merciless fraction of a second. A colossal, multi-billion-dollar Mexican dynasty had been effectively wiped out by a cruel combination of impenetrable weather and rugged terrain. When an entire family line is tragically extinguished in a single aviation disaster, do you believe massive corporate empires should strictly mandate that family members travel on separate aircraft to protect the lineage? Share your perspective in the comments. The sudden, violent death of the telecom mogul sent massive shockwaves through the global financial markets and deeply devastated the closely knit community in Mexico. The investigation ultimately pointed to the severe, blinding weather conditions and the unforgiving nature of the mountainous topography. All the money, power, and influence in the world could not clear the fog or move the mountains. It was a chilling reminder that the sky is a beautiful but ruthlessly unforgiving frontier. But our journey into the fatal skies of the elite is far from over. We must now travel from the rugged ravines of Mexico to the industrial heartland of Ohio, where a third-generation steel magnate boarded a twin-engine plane with his family, completely unaware that their lives would violently end just 7 agonizing minutes after leaving the runway.
Number 10. James Jim Weller. The industrial heartland of Ohio is a landscape forged by fire, sweat, and unbreakable steel. But on a warm summer afternoon, it became the devastating backdrop for the sudden, violent collapse of a powerful American dynasty. James Jim Weller was a titan of the Rust Belt, a third-generation magnate who ruled over Liberty Steel Industries with an iron will, amassing a multi-million-dollar fortune that secured his family's legacy for generations to come. He was a man who understood the immense power of raw materials,
shaping the very infrastructure of the nation. I must remind you that the final part of this specific investigation is an undeniably brutal, ongoing mystery that will leave you searching for answers, so stay with us as we uncover these chilling details. On the fateful day of June 30, 2025, Jim arrived at a private airfield near Youngstown, Ohio, preparing for what should have been a joyous family retreat. Accompanying the Steel Baron were his beloved wife Veronica, his adult son and heir apparent John, and his beautiful daughter-in-law Maria. They were joined by two highly experienced pilots, making a total of 6 souls boarding the gleaming twin-engine Cessna. For a family of such immense wealth and influence, private aviation was not a luxury, it was a standard mode of operation, a way to bypass the tedious constraints of commercial travel. When powerful, multi-generational business families fly together on a single private aircraft, do you think they are dangerously tempting fate and risking their entire corporate lineage? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The heavy aircraft taxied down the sun-baked runway, its twin engines roaring with a deafening mechanical authority that echoed across the flat Ohio landscape. Air traffic control granted them immediate clearance, and the Cessna gracefully lifted into the pale blue sky, climbing steadily away from the towering smokestacks of Youngstown. It was a picture-perfect takeoff, completely devoid of any warning signs or ominous weather. But as the landing gear retracted and the plane gained altitude, an invisible, catastrophic countdown had already begun. The Weller family had exactly 7 minutes left to live.
Inside the luxurious, soundproofed cabin of the twin-engine Cessna, the atmosphere was undoubtedly relaxed and intimate. Jim, Veronica, John, and Maria were likely settling into their plush leather seats, sipping beverages and discussing the future of Liberty Steel, completely insulated from the rushing winds outside. The first 5 minutes of the flight proceeded with absolute, terrifying normalcy. The pilots calmly communicated with regional air traffic control, confirming their assigned altitude and heading. The telemetry data showed a smooth, routine ascent. But modern aviation, for all its redundant safety features and brilliant engineering, is still a fragile defiance of gravity. In the agonizingly brief span of the 6th minute, that defiance was violently shattered. Without a single distress call, without a single frantic transmission of a mayday over the radio, the aircraft abruptly diverted from its stable flight path. Radar operators monitoring the glowing screens on the ground watched in sudden, escalating horror as the blip representing the multi-million-dollar Cessna began to behave erratically. The aircraft experienced a catastrophic loss of altitude, dropping from the sky with a sickening, terrifying velocity. Considering that the aircraft was a reliable twin-engine model and the weather was clear, do you suspect a sudden, catastrophic mechanical failure or something far more sinister occurring inside the cockpit? Drop your deepest theories in the comments. Inside the violently pitching cabin, the relaxed family retreat instantly transformed into a chaotic, screaming nightmare. The immense gravitational forces of the sudden dive would have pinned the terrified passengers to their seats, surrounded by the deafening roar of the struggling engines and the blaring, chaotic symphony of cockpit warning alarms. The pilots were desperately wrestling with the yokes, fighting an impossible losing battle against a heavy machine that had inexplicably become a massive aerodynamic brick falling from the heavens. The ground of rural Ohio was no longer a distant landscape. It was a massive, unyielding wall rushing up to them at an incomprehensible, fatal speed, leaving them trapped in a doomed metal cage.
Exactly 7 minutes after the wheels left the safety of the Youngstown tarmac, the doomed Cessna slammed violently into a densely wooded area just outside the city limits. The sheer, uncompromising force of the high-speed impact instantly obliterated the aircraft, sending a massive concussive shockwave through the quiet forest and igniting a raging inferno fueled by hundreds of gallons of aviation gas. The brutal, devastating crash left absolutely no survivors. First responders who rushed to the smoldering, twisted wreckage were met with a heartbreaking, apocalyptic scene. Jim Weller, his wife Veronica, their son John, and daughter-in-law Maria, along with the 2 pilots, were all pronounced dead amidst the burning, shattered metal. In a span of merely 420 seconds, the entire leadership and future bloodline of Liberty Steel Industries were violently, permanently erased from the earth. The profound shockwaves of this tragedy severely destabilized the local economy and left a historic company completely decapitated. Because this crash occurred so recently, in 2025, the official investigation remains fiercely active and shrouded in absolute mystery. Investigators are meticulously combing through the charred remnants, desperately trying to understand how a perfectly maintained twin-engine aircraft could simply fall out of a clear sky just minutes after takeoff. Knowing that the investigation into this brutal crash is still ongoing, do you believe the truth will eventually be revealed to the public, or will the immense wealth and corporate secrets of the Weller family keep the final report buried? We want to read your perspective below. The devastating end of the Weller dynasty stands as a chilling modern testament to the unforgiving nature of flight, proving that neither billions of dollars nor generations of steel-forged legacy can buy a safe landing when the sky demands its toll. But our relentless journey into the fatal flights of the ultra-wealthy is far from over. We must now turn our attention toward the frigid, unforgiving wilderness of Alaska, where a brilliant technology billionaire boarded his custom-built bush plane, flying directly into a howling, blinding snowstorm from which he would never, ever return.